Now, I want to get on to this Revolver News article. This Revolver News article came up just a couple of days ago, and it's very interesting to me. And they go over the color revolution again. And it says here, Transition Integrity Project. They're talking about the Transition Integrity Project. And they're saying, is this Soros-linked group plotting a color revolution against President Trump? If you don't know what a color revolution is, I guess put very simply, a lot of these operations that occur in places like Iran, places like Syria, places like Libya, places like other places like this, where the people of these countries are rising up to topple their dictator leaders, or the people of these countries are rising up and lynching Gaddafi, or the people of these countries are rising up and doing these going against their government. A lot of these would be considered color revolutions. And what they mean by color revolution in this context is that it's operated by the CIA. It's operated by what they call the deep state. And so, very simply, we have a couple of examples before we get into this here. CIA color revolutions have rarely succeeded, but they are increasing in frequency. Nevertheless, a CIA color revolution is when CIA operatives try to agitate local people, to incite riots, to try to overthrow government. Sounds very familiar. Doesn't it sound very familiar to what's going on right now? The CIA, a color revolution is when CIA operatives try to agitate local people, to incite riots, to try to overthrow governments. Makes you really think. When they talk about color revolutions and we talk about what this is not like a conspiracy theory. There are declassified documents that talk about CIA operatives inducing these color revolutions in a lot of these countries. But when we think back to what just happened, right, with the Proud Boy who was shot dead in the street by this man, this Antifa member, and all of a sudden this Antifa member ends up dead. Now, I'm not saying that I believe that there's some sort of like conspiracy theory here. But I'm also just saying that, it wouldn't be far-fetched to think that this was trying to become the shot heard around the world that sparked the final, inevitable revolution in the United States of America, riots in the United States of America. But now they're sort of backing off a lot of these riots because they're seeing that it's not working with the American people. And like this article says, CIA color revolutions have rarely succeeded. They have rarely succeeded. And they go on to give an example of one of these color revolutions, and this was in the 1950s. Mohammad Mossadegh, who was elected prime minister of Iran, he promised to nationalize the oil company in Iran, just like Norway did in Norway. American and British oil companies were making, at the time, a couple of bucks a barrel off of Iranian oil, while paying Iranians a couple of pennies a barrel for their oil. And so the CIA selected the Shah. And so this would be, they don't succeed the way that people think they would, right? Exactly. Well, I mean, I would say that there's somewhat success in a lot of these color revolutions, but this is basically an example of a color revolution. And so this is what they're talking about here in this Revolver article. And it says, in our previous report on Never Trump State Department official George Kent, Revolver News drew attention to the ominous similarities between the strategies and tactics the United States government employs in so-called color revolutions and the coordinated efforts of government bureaucrats, NGOs, non-government organizations, and the media to oust President Trump. This follow-up report will focus specifically on how the contested election scenario we are hearing so much about plays into the color revolution framework. Indeed, sowing doubt about the democratic legitimacy of the target and coupling it with calls for massive, mostly peaceful demonstration comes straight out of the color revolution playbook. I'm going to have to zoom in here. Getting a little bit blurry. My vision is going. I think I'm going to have to start wearing glasses. And this is precisely the messaging we've seen from those same key players in media, government, and the Democrat Party machine, mostly prominently from a shadowy George Soros-linked group known as the Transition Integrity Project. More about them soon. And so they go on to talk about the Transition Integrity Project. They go on to talk about this color revolution, basically, that is happening in America in attempts to oust President Trump from office, remove him from office. And one of the key parts of this revolution of this coup they're attempting to operate is what's going to happen with social media coming up. Now, of course, we're not going to go through that. We actually did go through this, the first article from Revolver News on a different stream. We're not going to go through this article all the way today, but you basically understand the gist of what they're trying to do there from that introductory portion of the article. So I'll just link the article in the live chat for you guys to read through later if you're interested. But one of the key parts of this is social media, using social media. Of course, they use any type of media. They use mainstream media, and they also use these social media companies and these social media platforms. And one of the things that we talked about before was this prediction that, and it came out of this Democrat group, this prediction that Donald Trump will initially appear to have won in a landslide on Election Day, but then a couple of weeks later, when all of the mail-in voting is counted, then Donald Trump will lose the election to Joe Biden. And Donald Trump even said this. He said, the only way that I'm actually going to lose the election is if there's mail-in voting fraud. And so you have a lot of these people pointing out the fact that, well, only 0.0006% of mail-in voting is considered fraud. It's like, first of all, that number is completely incorrect. That if you actually look into the number that they're giving you, the 0.0006% or whatever it is completely incorrect. You can look into this for yourself. But furthermore, secondly, when mail-in voting becomes more ubiquitous, and they're talking about this being a big, one of the bigger portions of all of the votes that are going to occur in America because of the coronavirus, even though Dr. Fauci says, and I quote, there's no reason why people can't show up to the polls in person on Election Day. There's no reason for mail-in voting to occur at a substantial substantial number. But if you have mail-in voting become a big portion of the votes for the presidential election, which is unprecedented, then of course there's going to be more instances of fraud. There's going to be more instances of fraud that can actually sway state elections, that can actually sway elections within particular states, within particular counties. And those counties can sway the election within the state. You understand? I mean, if you look at, a lot of these states, California, Illinois, New York, a lot of these elections are swayed by single counties because they have big cities within these single counties. So if you have election fraud going on, and we know that, California is not going to turn red, or we know that New York's not going to turn red, we know that Illinois is not going to turn red because of Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City, but you understand what I'm saying here. I mean, these single counties could sway the election within the state for President Trump if there's massive mail-in voting fraud. We just saw a story about a whole bunch of look at what happened in Florida, first of all. We know what happened in Florida a couple of times. It seems like Florida is one of these states where this shit always happens, going back to George W. Bush and, all the way up to the recent election in 2018 and even 2016. But if we look at what just happened, there was a news story where a bunch of mail bags were just dropped off. They were just dropped off, thrown in the trash. We saw another story. We went over that clip a couple of weeks ago on a stream, or I think maybe it was last week on the stream, where we talked about the dead cat. The dead cat that received a voter registration card. A dead cat received a voter registration card. So, and now what they're talking about here is that, in terms of social media, is that Trump is going to be prevented on social media by Twitter, by Facebook, by YouTube, by Instagram, by these big tech companies from declaring victory too early. Now, they present this as, well, if either party declares victory too early, we're going to restrict their access to social media in order to prevent them from announcing their victory too early. But what they mean is President Trump. Hillary Clinton told Joe Biden not to concede the election by any means until all of the mail-in voting is counted. So they're already telling us what they're going to do. This is already like a predictive programming type of a scenario where they're already telling us what to expect so that people don't freak out when it happens. But people are going to freak out. It's going to be messy. If I can predict anything that would resemble, and I don't like to get into like the whole like an actual civil war is going to happen where people are fighting in the streets, but it's going to be pretty crazy on Election Day and the weeks following Election Day if what they're saying will happen actually happens. And so here's this clip from Mark Zuckerberg.
One of the things that I think
and we'll turn up the volume here, and we're going to show you Mark Zuckerberg talking about his position, his ranking in this color revolution that is happening with President Trump right now. Take a listen.
One of the things that I think we and other media need to start doing is preparing the American people that there's nothing illegitimate about this election taking additional days or even weeks to make sure that all of the votes are counted. In fact, that might be important to make sure that this is a legitimate and fair election. So we're going to do a bunch of different messaging around that just to make sure that people know that that's normal. So if one of the candidates in any of the races claims victory before there's a consensus result, then we're going to add some informational context to that post directly, saying that there's no consensus result yet. I think that this is important because there is, unfortunately, I think, a heightened risk of civil unrest in the period, between
predictive programming,
between voting and a result being called or after that. And I just think that we need to be doing everything that we can to reduce the chances of violence or civil unrest in the wake of this election.
If that were to happen, would Facebook be blamed in part?
Well, I can't speak to what other people would do, but I think we're trying to make sure that we do our part to make sure that that none of this is organized on Facebook. We want to make sure that none of that stuff is happening on our services. But the country is very charged right now. So I think regardless of what we do, there's some chance that this happens across the country. I just want to make sure that we do our part to not contribute to it.
So there you go. So we just want to let people know that this is normal. We're not going to allow that on our platform. So what does that mean? Well, I mean, if we just look at what Twitter has been doing to President Trump lately, what Twitter has been doing to people like Lynn Wood and a couple of other prominent conservative individuals, the President of the United States, they have been doing this to him for a while now. They have been either, completely deleting their tweets, temporarily banning them from accessing the platform, and then putting like fact check links under those tweets. This is something that they've never done with any other president or any other politician that is Democratic on Twitter before. So what's going to come? Well, they're probably just going to outright ban Donald Trump from accessing their platforms if they don't ban him outright. I mean, Trump has already been permanently banned from Twitter one time. Remember this? When they said it was a mistake? Just like when they banned Lynn Wood and they said it was a mistake, or when they banned a Daily Caller journalist and said it was a mistake, or when they banned, all of these various other individuals and said it was a mistake. Look at what they're doing to Trump on Twitter right now. They're deleting or banning accounts that tweet a video that Trump retweets, or tweet a photo that Trump retweets, or tweet something out that Trump retweets. And so they're banning that original poster, restricting the access to the content that Trump amplifies. And so my prediction is that they're going to outright block Trump from accessing these platforms. And so the solution would be, and I think that they're too late on this, but we talked about this before, right? With them, we hear that there's going to be an announcement coming on Section 230 against Google, right? This just came out of the New York Times a couple of days ago. We covered that on this show. But they're too late for this. I think that they've started that way too late. They should have done this way earlier, because this is going to take a long time to go through the process of this, and it's going to be well past November 3rd. It's going to be well past the election. And so what the solution is that Trump needs to do something to where he announces to his Twitter followers that he will be only on Parler or something like this, or going to Parler. Now, I think that this probably isn't a good idea strategically for him to actually make this come to fruition, for him to actually follow through on a threat like this, because the election is coming up and he's going to need his Twitter account. But then you also have to think about the other Twitter accounts that are President Trump as well. They have a couple of Trump campaign accounts. They have, of course, the Trump Instagram account. But he has to do something to amplify alternative tech and alternative tech platforms so that he can get the word out of what's going on to the people after this happens, because this is going to happen. They're going to ban Trump. They're going to suppress his access to these platforms when the election comes up, and it's not normal. This is not normal. And there's no reason for mail-in voting to occur. Their favorite doctor even says this, Dr. Fauci. My goal is to eventually become a powerhouse of truth. That is why it is imperative that you check the links in the description below and go to either Patreon and Subscribestar and support us for at least the cost of a cup of coffee a month. We already have writers writing for theredelephants.com, but we'd like to bring on more in the near future. By the way, at theredelephants.com, you can also find t-shirts, hats, and other products. Check the links in the description below. It helps us out tremendously.